April 7th, 1945, 1900 hours. Greta Fischer's hands won't stop shaking. The cup is real china, not tin or wood, or the cracked enamel she'd learned to drink from in the last months of the Reich's collapse. Steam rises from actual tea, not ersatz, not bark shavings boiled into brown water, but tea that smells like her grandmother's kitchen, in a world that no longer exists. The British corporal who handed it to her 15 minutes ago said, "Careful, it's hot," and she'd almost dropped it. Not from the temperature, from the fact that he'd spoken to her like a person who could be burned. She's been a prisoner for 2 weeks now. 2 weeks of waiting for the brutality to begin. Every propaganda film she'd ever been shown in training, every whispered warning passed between Helferinnen in the auxiliary barracks, every directive from officers preparing them for potential capture, all of it promised the same thing. British vengeance would be swift, creative, permanent. They would make examples of German women who'd served the Reich. The words "unspeakable treatment" appeared in 3 separate briefing documents. And yet, here she sits, in a heated barracks with a clean blanket on her bunk, holding tea in real china. And the worst thing that's happened to her is a British medical officer who treated her infected finger without comment, who cleaned the wound, applied sulfa powder, wrapped it in fresh gauze, and told her through an interpreter to keep it dry, who looked at her auxiliary uniform shoulder patch and wrote Luftwaffe signals on his chart, like he was documenting her occupation, not her crimes. This systematic decency is the most disorienting weapon she's ever faced. Because when you brace yourself for monsters and you get human beings instead, patient, bureaucratic, occasionally even kind human beings, everything you thought you knew begins to collapse. The foundation cracks. You start wondering what else was a lie. And that wondering is more dangerous than any interrogation, any punishment, any cell. It changes you from the inside. But 2 weeks earlier, standing on a railway platform in southern England with 31 other women who couldn't stop trembling, none of them knew this was coming. They knew only what they'd been promised. And it wasn't tea. March 23rd, 1945. 16:47 hours. The train shudders to a stop at a railway siding 3 miles outside Winchester, and Greta Fischer realizes she's going to vomit. Not from motion sickness, from the certainty that the doors are about to open, and the real war, the one they'd been shielded from in their auxiliary roles, is finally going to touch them, devour them. They've been traveling for 6 days since the surrender of their unit in northern France. 6 days in converted freight cars with bucket latrines and hard benches and guards who spoke no German. 6 days of silence broken only by quiet crying, which stopped around day 3 when everyone ran out of tears. The door slides open. Cold March air rushes in, sharp with the smell of wet earth and coal smoke. Greta is third in line behind Margaret Hoffman, and a girl whose name she's forgotten, a supply clerk from München who hasn't spoken since they were loaded onto trucks in Calais. The light outside is gray, English gray. The kind that doesn't commit to anything, not day, not night, just an ambient dimness that feels like the inside of a held breath. Rouse, Rouse. One of the guards, a British corporal who looks about 19 and hasn't smiled once in 6 days, gestures toward the platform. His voice is flat, mechanical. Greta's German is good better than good. It's what got her placed in signals, decoding encrypted communications, and she knows "raus" is what German soldiers said to prisoners. Get out. Move. The corporal using it feels like mockery. Or maybe just efficiency. She can't tell. 32 women step down onto gravel. The sound is unnaturally loud. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Greta's auxiliary uniform, the Feldgrau skirt and jacket, that meant something 2 weeks ago, That meant she was part of the Luftwaffe, part of the machine. Part of something larger than herself is filthy. There are stains on her collar she won't think about. Her stockings have holes. One of her shoes has a split sole that lets in water. Margaret, stepping down beside her, looks worse. Her face is the color of old paper. She's 27, a flak Helferin who operated anti-aircraft predictors outside Hamburg until their unit was overrun by British armor. She'd been good at her job. Greta knows this because Margaret told her once, late at night in the barracks, voice thick with something that wasn't quite pride and wasn't quite shame. I tracked 17 confirmed bomber formations, plotted them for the guns, maybe saved the battery, maybe killed British airmen who had mothers waiting for them. Both things can be true. They expect dogs. That's what the briefing officer said before their unit collapsed. If the British take you, there will be dogs. German shepherds trained to attack. They'll set them on you to make you compliant. Greta scans the platform. No dogs. There are guards, yes. 4 British soldiers with rifles slung casually over shoulders. But the rifles are pointed at the ground. The soldiers look bored. One is smoking. Another checks his watch like he's worried he'll miss his tea break. They expect searchlights, the kind that pin you in place, that turn your body into a specimen under examination. The platform has lights, but they're just standard railway lamps. Dim, functional, inadequate against the gathering dusk. They expect rifle butts. The officer who gave them the briefing had been explicit. They will strike you to establish dominance. Do not resist. Do not fight back. Cover your head and stomach. Greta's hands instinctively move to her midsection now, protective. But the British corporal who opened the door just stands there, clipboard in hand, waiting. A British sergeant approaches. He's older, maybe 40, with the kind of weathered face that suggests he's been at this war for all 6 years of it. He carries a thermos. The incongruity of this, a thermos on a prisoner platform, makes Greta's brain stutter. The sergeant speaks, his voice carrying over the sound of women breathing too hard, too fast. An interpreter steps forward. Young, Welsh accent in his English, which Greta can hear even through the German translation. "Queue up, please." The please is what stops Greta's heart. Not a command. Not an order barked with contempt. Please, like they're at a post office. Like this is administrative tedium, not the processing of enemy prisoners. You'll be processed inside. The interpreter gestures toward a low building at the end of the platform brick, functional, with light glowing from windows that have actual glass. Tea's on in the canteen. Tea. The word hangs in the air like something none of them know how to catch. Greta watches the sergeant pour himself a cup from his thermos. Steam curls upward, visible in the cold air. He's not watching them with hatred. He's barely watching them at all. Just a man at the end of his shift, thinking about going home, about his feet hurting, about whether his wife made stew or just toast for dinner. He looks at them the way you'd look at a delivery you were expecting, mildly inconvenient, but necessary to process. Anneliese Brandt, 19 years old, Supply Administration, starts crying. Not sobbing. Just tears running down her face while she stands perfectly still. The British sergeant glances at her, then at the interpreter, and says something low. The interpreter nods. "It's all right, miss. You're safe now." Safe? From whom? From what? They're prisoners. The enemy. They wore the uniform. They took the oath. Greta watches Anneliese's face crumble, watches her try to understand how safe can be a word applied to them. Safe implies they matter. Safe implies someone cares whether they live or die. Safe is not a word enemies use. They queue. Of course they do. German women know how to queue. It's efficient. Orderly. The line shuffles forward in silence, broken only by the crunch of gravel and the distant sound of someone coughing. Greta is directly behind Margaret now. Close enough to see the tremor in the older woman's shoulders. Close enough to hear her whisper. So quiet, it's almost lost in the wind. They told us we'd be torn apart by mobs. Yes, they'd been told that too. Explicit descriptions in the briefing. British civilians, especially women whose husbands or sons had died in bombing raids, would be waiting at processing centers. They'd have stones, sticks, rage refined into something physical. The officers said it was the German women's own fault for serving the Luftwaffe, for enabling the bombers that hit London and Coventry and Birmingham. You will be held accountable, the briefing officer said. The British population demands justice. Greta looks around. No civilians, no mob. Just the 4 bored guards, the sergeant with his thermos, and the interpreter who looks like he'd rather be literally anywhere else. A cigarette. That's what one guard wants. He's patting his pockets, searching. Another guard hands him one. They light it between them, passing a match. Casual. Like the line of German prisoners 6 feet away doesn't exist. The processing center is a requisitioned manor house. Greta learns this later, but approaching it in the dusk, she sees only something from a different world. A country house with ivy growing up one side and a gravel drive that crunches under their feet. There are Nissen huts behind it, 6 the curved corrugated metal shelters British forces use for temporary housing. But the main building is old stone and leaded windows. It looks like the illustrations in English novels her mother used to read before the war. Back when reading English literature wasn't unpatriotic. They're herded? No, that's wrong. They're guided. There's a difference. Herding involves force, pressure, dogs nipping at heels. Guiding is the sergeant gesturing toward a door and saying through the interpreter, "This way, please. Mind the step. Mind the step." As if a twisted ankle would be a genuine concern for a British soldier processing enemy prisoners. As if they're visitors who might sue if they trip. Inside, the manor house smells like boiled vegetables and floor wax. Very British, Greta thinks, and then wonders where that thought came from. What propaganda film planted the stereotype of British institutional smells in her brain? The hallway is lined with paperwork stations, desks borrowed from somewhere, clerks behind each one, more clipboards. Everything is clipboard. She'd laugh if her throat wasn't so tight. Name, rank, unit, date of birth. The British corporal at the first desk doesn't look up. He's young, maybe 22, with ink stains on his fingers and the kind of concentration that suggests he takes his filing duties seriously. Greta is reminded suddenly of boys in her gymnasium, hunched over Latin homework, determined to get every declension correct. Fischer, Greta, Luftnachrichtenhelferin, March 14, 1923. Her voice sounds strange, thin. She hasn't spoken in days. The corporal writes it down in careful block letters. His tongue is between his teeth. That's what gets her. That tiny detail tongue between teeth, the unconscious gesture of someone focused on getting something right. He writes her name like it matters. Like the spelling of Fischer is important to him personally. Medical conditions? Allergies? The interpreter translates. Greta shakes her head. Infectious diseases? Lice? Open wounds? Her finger. The infected one. Finger. Infected. She holds it up. The bandage is dirty now, gray with grime. The corporal makes a note. You'll see the M.O., medical officer. Next station, second door, on the right. He gestures her forward. That's it. No interrogation. No demands to know what intelligence she possesses, what secrets she holds. Just name, rank, unit, date of birth. And please see the doctor about that finger. The medical officer is a captain. Greta knows British rank insignia from training, from studying aircraft recognition charts that included information about crew composition. Captain. Not a conscript, then. Someone with education. He looks at her finger the way a mechanic looks at an engine interested only in function and disrepair. How long infected? 1 week, maybe more. Her English is hesitant, rusty, but present. She'd studied it in school, before the war made English the enemy's tongue. Right. He unwraps the filthy bandage with hands that are gentle. This is what breaks something in Greta's chest. The gentleness. The way he supports her wrist with one hand while unwrapping with the other, as if she might be in pain, as if her pain would matter to him. This needs cleaning, sulfa powder, fresh dressing. You're lucky no streaking yet. Another week, and you'd have lost it. Lost it. The finger. He says this matter-of-factly, not as a threat, just medical reality. He cleans the wound with something that burns. Greta gasps. He glances up. Hurts? She nods. Good. Means the nerves still work. He applies powder, wraps fresh gauze, tapes it secure. Keep it dry. Change dressing daily. Report if you see red lines moving up your arm. Understood? Understood. He writes something on a chart. Under condition, he writes Luftwaffe signals, like it's a disease, or maybe just a fact. He doesn't look at her with contempt. He looks at her like she's patient 17 of a very long day, and his shift ends in an hour. Next. Margaret steps forward. Greta moves to the side, watching. The captain asks the same questions. Margaret answers in German. The interpreter translates. The captain listens, nods, makes notes. When he learns Margaret operated anti-aircraft predictors, his face doesn't change. No anger, no accusation. He just writes Flak Helferin and moves on to asking about her chronic cough. Barracks assignment comes next. A female British sergeant, the first woman they've seen since arrival, hands them each a blanket, a towel, a bar of soap, and a tin cup. The soap smells like carbolic. The blanket is wool, real wool, thick enough to matter. The sergeant speaks no German, but her gestures are clear. Follow me. This way. Watch your head on the doorframe. The barracks are Nissen huts behind the manor house. Inside, 20 beds. Not bunks, beds, with mattresses. The kind that compress when you sit on them, that have springs and padding, and the possibility of actual sleep. There's a stove in the center, cold now, but present, functional. There are windows with blackout curtains pulled back, because the war in Europe is over, and there's no need for blackout anymore. The light is fading outside, but Greta can see trees. English oak, probably. Maybe ash. Growing like trees everywhere, indifferent to borders and uniforms and who wins wars. Tea in 20 minutes, the interpreter says. He's followed them to the barracks. Canteen is past the second hut. Follow the others. Queue at the serving window. You'll receive a meal ticket tomorrow. Meal ticket. Greta's mind stutters again on the bureaucracy of this. Tickets. Queues. As if they're factory workers on lunch break, not prisoners of war. The women stand in the barracks after the British leave. No one speaks. Annalisa sits on a bed, just sits. Testing it, and lets out a sound that might be a laugh, or might be the thing that comes before complete breakdown. Margaret drops her blanket on a bed near the stove and stares at it like it might bite her. This isn't real, someone says. A woman Greta doesn't know, older, maybe 35, with a Berlin accent and eyes that have seen too much. This is psychological warfare. Make us comfortable. Then the real interrogations begin. Then they what? Margaret's voice is sharp. Then they continue giving us soap and blankets and tea? How evil! The Berlin woman flinches. You don't understand. This is how they break you. They make you trust. Then they what? Margaret repeats. She's standing now, still holding her towel, looking at the other woman with something that might be anger or might be a different kind of breaking. They've had us for 6 days. They could have done anything. Anything. Instead, they gave us a doctor who fixed Greta's finger. A sergeant who said, please, beds. Beds, Hilda. Real beds. Hilda. So that's her name. Greta commits it to memory. Hilda from Berlin. 29 other women whose names she'll learn over the coming days. 29 stories. 29 sets of expectations shattered by the mundane reality of British administrative processing. The tea is real. That's what matters right now. The canteen is a tent behind the third Nissen hut, and when they arrive queuing naturally, orderly, because German women know how to queue, there are British soldiers serving from enormous steel pots. The tea is dark, bitter, hot enough to burn your tongue. They serve it with milk. Actual milk. Greta hasn't seen fresh milk in 8 months. The Reich's dairy supply collapsed last autumn. She drinks it too fast and scalds her mouth and doesn't care. There's bread, not ersatz, not sawdust mixed with chestnuts and hope. Bread that tastes like wheat. It's a small loaf per person, and when Greta takes hers, the British private serving says something. The interpreter translates, he says there's more if you're still hungry. More. The concept is absurd. In the last months of the Reich, more didn't exist. You ate what you had. You made it last. You didn't ask for seconds because there weren't any. But here, in an enemy prison camp, a British private is offering more bread to German prisoners. Greta eats slowly. She makes the loaf last. Around her, the other women do the same. Some cry while they eat. Some eat in silence, faces blank. Anneliese takes her bread back to the barracks without eating it, like she's afraid it will disappear if she doesn't protect it. That first night, Greta lies on a real mattress under a wool blanket in a heated barracks, not warm, but not freezing, which is more than she'd had the last 3 months in France, and listens to 31 other women not sleeping. Someone is crying. Someone else is praying. The Berlinerin, Hilda, is having a whispered argument with a woman in the next bed about whether this is psychological warfare or just British efficiency. Greta holds her empty teacup. The corporal who served tea hadn't collected them. Keep it, he'd said through the interpreter. You'll need it for morning tea. Morning tea. As if there will be a morning. As if routines will continue. As if they're going to be here long enough to need cups. Her finger throbs under the fresh bandage. Clean throbbing. The kind that means healing, not rot. The British captain's words echo. You're lucky. Lucky. She's a prisoner in enemy hands. Her country has collapsed. Her world has ended. And a British medical officer called her lucky because her finger will heal. She can't reconcile it. Any of it. The propaganda films showed British brutality. The briefings detailed expected torture. The whispered warnings from other Helferinnen who'd heard from someone who'd heard from someone described mob violence, sexual assault, public humiliation. None of them mentioned tea. Outside, a guard walks past. She can hear his boots on gravel. He's whistling. Actually, whistling. Some tune she doesn't recognize, probably British, probably popular. A guard whistling while walking past a barracks full of enemy prisoners, as if they're not a threat. Not even particularly interesting, just part of his shift before he goes off duty, and has his own tea, and maybe reads a letter from home. Greta realizes she's trembling. Not from cold, from the absence of everything she'd been promised would happen. They told her the British would make examples of German women who served the Reich. They told her she'd face justice, vengeance, the accumulated rage of a nation that had endured 5 years of bombing. They told her many things. They didn't tell her about the thermos, or the please, or the sergeant who said, "Careful, it's hot," like she was a person who could be burned. She falls asleep still holding the cup, her treacherous brain already wondering what tomorrow will bring, what new impossibility will further destroy the careful architecture of everything she'd been taught to believe about enemies and war and what happens when you lose. April 9th, 1945. 0600 hours. Greta wakes to the sound of a bell. Not harsh, not military, just a bell ringing somewhere outside the barracks, the kind that might call farm workers to breakfast or school children to lessons. She's disoriented for 3 seconds. Where is she? Why is the mattress soft? Why doesn't her finger hurt? And then memory crashes back. Winchester. England. Prisoner. The barracks around her stirs to life. Women sit up slowly, testing whether yesterday was real or fever dream. Margaret is already dressed, standing by the window. Looking out at dawn breaking over English countryside, her face is unreadable. "They're opening the canteen," she says without turning around. "I can see smoke from the cooking fires." Breakfast is porridge. Real oats, not the grain substitute that tasted like wet cardboard and sat in your stomach like punishment. There's milk again. A small pat of margarine. Tea. Always tea. The British serve it like it's medicine, like it can fix things. Maybe they're right. Greta drinks 2 cups and feels almost human. The work assignments come after breakfast. A British captain different from the medical officer, this one younger, with spectacles and a clipboard that seems surgically attached to his hand, reads names and posts through the interpreter. The camp needs labor. The women will provide it. This is stated without malice, without triumph. Just fact. You're here. We need workers. This is how prison camps function. Fisher, Greta Camp Administration Office. Administration. She knows administration. She spent 18 months in Luftwaffe signals doing nothing but administration, filing decoded messages, tracking aircraft movements, maintaining logs that probably helped kill people she'll never know about. The irony of continuing administrative work for the enemy is not lost on her. Hoffman, Margaret Farm Detail, Vegetable Plots. Margaret nods. She'd grown up on a farm outside Hamburg before the war made her into something else. Maybe she'll find it comforting, Greta thinks. Soil under fingernails. Things that grow regardless of politics. Brandt, Anneliese Laundry Detail. Other names, other assignments, kitchen work, cleaning, maintenance. Hilda from Berlin gets assigned to the canteen, which seems either cruel or perfect depending on how you look at it. Near food, but never hungry. Close to comfort, but still a prisoner. They're issued armbands, yellow cloth with PW stenciled in black. Prisoner of war. The designation makes it official. Makes it real. Greta ties hers on her left arm, over the sleeve where her Luftwaffe insignia used to be, before a British corporal in France cut it off with scissors that needed sharpening. The camp administration office occupies 2 rooms in the manor house. One is file storage floor to ceiling cabinets, containing what looks like every piece of paperwork generated by the British Army since 1939. The other is working space. 4 desks, 2 typewriters, One harried-looking British sergeant major who introduces himself as Hargreaves and looks at Greta like she's either salvation or another problem. He hasn't decided which yet. "You read English?" he asks through the interpreter. "Yes, some. I write also." Hargreaves's face transforms. Relief. Pure, uncomplicated relief. Thank Christ. The filing system is a disaster. German prisoners, British system, nobody can find anything. You're going to fix it. He shows her the problem. Prisoner records filed by arrival date, but cross-referenced by nationality, but also by camp section, but also alphabetically within each subsection, except some clerk thought rank should matter more than alphabet. And now, nothing makes sense. It's a beautiful disaster. The kind that happens when multiple people with different ideas of organization all touch the same system without coordinating. Greta looks at the chaos. Filing cabinets with drawers hanging open. Papers stacked on every surface. One entire box labeled "Miscellaneous Sort Later" that has clearly never been sorted. This is... She searches for the English word. "Very bad." Hargreaves laughs. Actually laughs. "Very bad. Yes, that's diplomatic. Can you fix it?" Can she fix it? She reorganized an entire Luftwaffe communications archive in 3 weeks, while her commanding officer was on medical leave. She created a filing system efficient enough that the Oberst personally commended her and put her up for a medal she never received because the Reich collapsed first. This British mess is a problem, yes, but problems are what she's good at. Maybe the only thing she's good at anymore. "Yes, I fix." "Outstanding. You'll be paid camp scrip for your work. 10 chits per week. You can use them at the canteen, chocolate, cigarettes, soap, that sort of thing." Paid. She's going to be paid to organize enemy files. The absurdity is so complete that Greta almost says something, almost asks if this is a joke or a test or some elaborate British form of psychological torture. But Hargreaves is already moving on, showing her where supplies are kept, where the tea station is. Of course, there's a tea station. This is England, where the lavatory is down the hall. Office hours are 0800 to 1700 with an hour for lunch. Questions? No, no questions. Right then. Welcome to the madhouse. He pauses at the door. And Fisher. That finger healing all right? He remembers her name, knows about her finger. This British sergeant major in charge of administration knows which prisoner has an infected finger and cares enough to ask. Greta doesn't know what to do with this information, where to file it in her brain, so she just nods. Good, good. Would hate to lose you to gangrene before you've sorted this mess. He leaves. Greta stands alone in the office, surrounded by organizational chaos and the smell of old paper and furniture polish. Through the window, she can see Margarete and other women walking toward the farm plots, tools over their shoulders. Through another window, British soldiers crossing the yard, heading to whatever duties fill their days. No one is watching her. No one is guarding her. She's alone with thousands of confidential documents, and the door is open, and she could walk out and what? Run. Where? She's in England. Southern England, miles from the coast, wearing a German auxiliary uniform and a yellow POW armband. She'd last maybe 30 minutes before someone stopped her. And even if she could escape to where? Germany is occupied. Her family's home in Stuttgart was bombed 18 months ago. She doesn't know if her mother survived. The Reich is gone. There's nothing to run to except uncertainty and probable death. So she stays. She opens the first filing cabinet, and she starts sorting. 3 days pass. Then a week. Then 2. The routine becomes familiar in a way that feels dangerous. Wake to the bell. Breakfast. Work. Lunch sandwiches brought to her desk, usually cheese and pickle. Very British. More work. Dinner in the canteen, evening in the barracks, sleep. Repeat. The filing system takes shape under her hands. She creates a new framework. Prisoner name, nationality, arrival date, section assignment, medical notes, work assignment, everything cross-referenced in a master ledger she maintains personally. When Hargreaves sees the new system operational, he brings the camp commandant to look. The commandant is a colonel, mid-50s, with a military mustache, and the kind of posture that suggests he's been standing at attention since 1918. Remarkable, he says, flipping through the new ledger. How long did this take? The interpreter translates. Greta answers in English carefully. 2 weeks, not finished. More work needed. But functional now? Yes, functional. The colonel nods. Well done, Fisher. Hargreaves, make sure she gets extra rations this week. Good work deserves recognition. Extra rations for filing papers, for doing exactly what she's good at, what she was trained to do, what she's been doing since she was 17 years old, and the Reich told her she could serve without carrying a rifle. The colonel walks away, and Greta sits very still, feeling something crack inside her chest. Not break. Crack. Like ice on a river when the spring thaw begins. Week 3, May the 2nd, 1945. 1400 hours. The British lieutenant colonel enters the office while Greta is updating prisoner medical records. He's tall, probably 6'2", with gray at his temples and the kind of weathered face that suggests he's seen too many wars. His uniform is impeccable. Every button gleams, but his eyes are tired. The kind of tired that sleep won't fix. Afternoon, he says, not to Hargreaves, to Greta, directly to her. She stands automatically, the German instinct for military courtesy overriding her prisoner status. Sir, at ease, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Pemberton. I oversee camp operations. He looks at the filing cabinets, at the orderly desks, at the system she's created. Hargreaves tells me you've revolutionized our record system. The interpreter translates. Greta responds in English, slower. I organize only. System was already here, just confused. Nevertheless, Pemberton pulls out a chair, sits down like he has all the time in the world. Like she's not a prisoner, and he's not her captor, and this isn't deeply strange. I wanted to get your thoughts on something. We're expanding the camp another 100 prisoners arriving next week. I'll need a more efficient processing system. What would you recommend? Get your thoughts on something. Recommend. He's asking her opinion. Like a colleague. Like someone whose expertise matters. Greta's brain stutters the way it did when the corporal said, "Careful, it's hot." This doesn't fit any pattern she understands. She swallows, tries again. More desks for intake. 3, maybe 4. Each desk does one part personal details, medical, work assignment, housing. Faster. Less confusion. Pemberton nods slowly. Assembly line approach. Makes sense. Anything else? Medical first, before personal details. If prisoner is sick, needs treatment immediately. Details can wait. Practical. He's making notes in a small book, actually writing down her suggestions. And for the housing assignments? We've had some conflicts. Women from different units don't always get along. Separate by age, not unit. Young together, older together. Age brings perspective. Less fighting. Interesting. Why age over unit loyalty? This is the moment when Greta realizes she's having an actual conversation with a British lieutenant colonel about camp management strategy. Not being interrogated, not being tested. Just talking. Like two administrators solving a logistics problem. She chooses her words carefully. Unit loyalty breaks when unit is gone. Germany lost. Reich is finished. Unit means nothing now. But age young women scared differently than old women. Young women need different things. Older women maybe have children at home. Worry different. Age is more honest than rank. Pemberton's pen stops moving. He looks at her for a long moment, and Greta realizes she's just said something he wasn't expecting. Something real. She waits for the punishment, the reprimand, the reminder that she's a prisoner who should not philosophize about honesty. Instead, Pemberton says, "You're absolutely right. Thank you, Fisher. These are good insights." He stands, adjusts his cap. Then, "My daughter is about your age, 23. She's a nurse in London." He says this casually, like mentioning the weather. "When I saw the list of German women prisoners arriving, I thought about her. What I'd want for her if she'd been captured serving our side. Basic decency, I suppose. Fair treatment. Someone to see her as a person, not just an enemy." He doesn't say, "despite everything." He doesn't qualify it. He just leaves that statement hanging there, his daughter, your age, what he'd want for her, and then nods once. "Carry on, Fisher." The door closes behind him. Greta has to sit down. Her legs won't support her anymore. The British lieutenant colonel just compared her to his daughter, implicitly acknowledged that she could have been his daughter in different circumstances, treated her like someone whose humanity was never in question. She puts her head in her hands. The filing cabinets blur. When Hargreaves comes in 20 minutes later, she's still sitting there, surrounded by perfectly organized records, crying silently into her palms. "Fisher, you all right?" She nods, wipes her face. "Yes, sorry. I am fine." "Pemberton said you gave him good advice about the expansion." "He asked. I answered." "Well?" Hargreaves hands her a handkerchief. "That's what colleagues do, isn't it? Ask and answer." Colleagues. The word destroys something inside her that was already broken. She takes the handkerchief, thanks him, goes back to work because work is safe, work is familiar. Work doesn't require her to process the impossible reality that the enemy sees her as a colleague. That evening, Greta finds Margaret in the barracks, soil under her fingernails, face flushed from sun and physical labor. "How was the farm?" "Good. Strange. The British corporal supervising us brought his lunch to share. Sandwiches. He cut them in half, gave us portions, said he couldn't eat while we were hungry." Margaret stares at her hands. "I don't understand it. Any of it." Neither does Greta, but she's starting to understand that not understanding might be the point. That maybe the British strategy, if it even is a strategy, is to refuse to participate in the cycle of dehumanization that the war demanded. To treat prisoners like people because that's who they've chosen to be, regardless of who their prisoners were forced to become. In the morning, she'll go back to the office. She'll organize more files. Maybe Pemberton will ask her more questions. Maybe he won't. But either way, she's begun to suspect that the tea and the pleas and the comparison to his daughter are all part of the same thing, a deliberate, systematic refusal to let the war turn them into monsters. And that refusal is more devastating than any brutality could have been. Because you can survive brutality. You can even resist it. But kindness from enemies? That changes everything. That makes you question every propaganda film, every briefing, every certainty you held about who was good and who was evil, and whether those categories even mean anything anymore. The announcement comes during lunch. The camp commandant stands in the canteen, waits for silence, speaks in clear, measured English that the interpreters translate into German for the prisoners who need it. The German armed forces have surrendered unconditionally. The war in Europe is over. Silence. Complete silence. Not celebration. Not relief. Just silence. 200 women processing information that means their country is gone. Not defeated. Gone. The Reich that was supposed to last 1,000 years lasted 12. The new order is over. Germany is occupied by foreign powers. Whatever comes next will not be what they were promised. Greta expects the British soldiers to celebrate, to cheer, to break out champagne, to mock the German prisoners for serving a losing cause. Instead, they just stand there. Some look relieved. Some look exhausted. Most look like they're already thinking about going home, about seeing families they haven't touched in years, about rebuilding lives the war interrupted. The commandant continues, "You will all be repatriated in due course, once arrangements can be made with the occupation authorities. Until then, camp operations continue as normal. This changes nothing about your treatment here. This changes nothing." That's what he says. And he's right. Breakfast will still be porridge. The filing office will still need organizing. Margaret will still work the farm plots. Anneliese will still do laundry. The British will still serve tea and say please, and treat them like human beings who can be burned, who can be trusted with filing systems, who can give advice about camp expansion. That night, lying in her bunk, Greta hears Hilda crying. Not loud, just steady, quiet, weeping. Someone, maybe Anneliese, maybe one of the others, tries to comfort her. "It's over," they whisper. "We survived." But that's not why Hilda is crying. Greta knows because she's fighting the same tears. They're not crying because it's over. They're crying because they survived it wrong. Because they're on the losing side. Because everything they believed turned out to be ash and propaganda and lies, and the people they were taught to hate turned out to be the ones who treated them like human beings when their own side abandoned them. The next morning, Pemberton comes to the office again. He hands Greta a clipboard with the new processing system diagram. "Based on your recommendations, wanted you to see it before we implement it." She looks at the diagram. It's exactly what she suggested: medical first, assembly line intake, age-based housing assignments. It's good. It will work. Credit where it's due, Fisher. This was your design. He leaves her holding the clipboard, and Greta understands something new. They're giving her ownership, responsibility, recognition. Not because they have to. Because they've chosen to see her contribution as valuable regardless of her nationality, her uniform, her role in a war machine that killed their countrymen. She thinks about the thermos, the tea that first night. Careful, it's hot. Every piece of this systematic decency has been leading somewhere, building towards something. Not re-education, not propaganda, just modeling. Showing rather than telling, demonstrating through 10,000 small acts that there's another way to treat prisoners, another way to win, another way to be human, even when war says humanity is weakness. And it's working. That's what terrifies her. It's working. June 17, 1945, 1100 hours. The repatriation interviews begin on a Tuesday. Greta sits across from a British major, not Pemberton, someone new, younger, with kind eyes and a wedding ring that he turns absently while he talks. The interpreter sits beside him, unnecessary now. Greta's English has improved from 3 months of filing reports and listening to Hargreaves curse at paperwork in 2 languages. "How were you treated during your internment, Miss Fisher?" Miss. Not prisoner, not enemy. Miss, like she's a person filling out a survey, not a former member of the Luftwaffe auxiliary being processed for return to an occupied homeland. I was treated, she stops. Searches for words that can contain the impossibility of the last 3 months. Like a human being. The major writes this down. Can you elaborate? I had medical care, work that used my skills, pay for my labor, food, safety, respect. Each word costs her something. I was treated better here than I was in my own service the last year of the war. The major's pen pauses. That's quite a statement. It is true statement. He looks at her for a long moment. We'll be sending you back to Germany within the month. The British zone, near Hamburg. You'll be released to civilian authorities there. Do you have family? Mother, in Stuttgart, American zone. I don't know if she... Greta can't finish the sentence. Survived. The word she can't say. We can help you trace her. Red Cross has personnel locator services. He slides a form across the desk. Fill this out. We'll do what we can. We'll do what we can. For a German prisoner looking for family in a destroyed country? Because that's what they do, apparently. These British soldiers who could have treated them like the enemy deserved, and instead chose something harder. Chose humanity. August 3rd, 1945. Greta spends her last week in Winchester training her replacement, a German prisoner from a later transport, who has neat handwriting and a desperate need to be useful. The filing system is complete now. Perfect. Every record cross-referenced, every update logged, every prisoner tracked from arrival to departure. Hargreaves calls it the best administrative system in any camp he's ever seen. He doesn't add built by a German prisoner, but they both know it. On her second-to-last day, Pemberton stops by the office. He's holding something wrapped in brown paper. Fisher! A moment! She follows him into the corridor, where there's privacy but also propriety. He hands her the package. For the journey, socks, a jumper. Gets cold on the trains. She takes it because refusing would be ruder than accepting. Thank you, sir. No, thank you. He meets her eyes. You made this place run better. You contributed something valuable. That matters. I wanted you to know that. This is the moment. The 70% mark. The place where the macro loop closes, where the question asked in the hook finally gets its answer. What breaks a person more, cruelty or unexpected kindness? Cruelty confirms what you expect. It validates your worldview. It lets you hate cleanly. But kindness from enemies? That destroys everything. It makes you question every briefing, every propaganda film, every certainty about who was good and who was evil. It forces you to confront the possibility that the monsters were never monsters, that they were just people who made different choices. And if they're people, then maybe you are too. Maybe everyone is. Maybe the categories we built to make war possible, us and them, good and evil, human and enemy, were always lies we told ourselves so we could kill without drowning in the weight of it. Sir, her voice cracks, why did you treat us this way? Pemberton considers the question. Because we could. Because having the power to be cruel and choosing not to use it, that's what separates civilization from barbarism. Because I have a daughter your age, and I'd want someone to see her humanity, even if she'd made terrible mistakes. Because the war is over, and someone has to break the cycle. He adjusts his cap. Also, because you were never really the enemy, were you? You were women who answered their country's call, same as our women in the WAF and the WRNS. Different uniforms, same humanity underneath. He walks away, and Greta stands in the corridor holding a package of warm clothes for a journey home, crying in a way she hasn't cried since the night she was captured. Not from fear, from the recognition that she's been given something she can never repay. Not her life that was always protected by the Geneva Convention, but her humanity. They gave her back her humanity without ever acknowledging they held it. That's the sophistication of it. That's the weapon she never saw coming. August 5th, 1945, 0800 hours, the train station. The same railway siding where she arrived 4.5 months ago expecting dogs and searchlights and brutality. Greta stands with Margaret and Annalisa and 63 other German women being repatriated in this transport. They're wearing their own clothes now washed, mended by British waves who volunteered to help, returned with all personal items accounted for. Greta's auxiliary uniform is folded in her kit bag. She'll probably burn it when she gets to Hamburg. Or maybe she'll keep it as evidence. Proof that this happened. That she wore the uniform and survived, and was treated like a human being by the people she'd been taught to fear most. The same British sergeant from their arrival stands on the platform. He's older now, more tired. Aren't they all? He's checking clipboards, ensuring everyone's accounted for, doing the administrative dance that seems to be the British solution to every problem. Organize it, process it, add tea. Fisher! He finds her in the crowd. You're on this transport? Yes, Sergeant. Did all right here, I hope. Yes, thank you. He nods, then reaches into his kit bag, pulls out a thermos. The same one, or maybe a different one, she can't tell, but it doesn't matter. For the journey, tea's already made, should stay hot for a few hours. Greta takes it with hands that are shaking again, not from fear this time, from something else. Something that doesn't have a name in German or English. I cannot repay this. Don't need to. Just... He hesitates. This sergeant who's seen too much war. Just remember we tried. When you tell people what happened here, remember that we tried to be decent, even when it would have been easier not to be. I will remember. Always. The train whistle blows. Time to board. Time to leave this impossible place and return to a Germany that no longer exists. To rebuild a life from the ruins of everything she thought she knew. Margaret climbs aboard. Annalisa follows. Greta starts up the steps, then turns back. Sergeant, your name? Whitmore. Sergeant Thomas Whitmore. Thank you, Sergeant Whitmore, for the tea, for everything. He touches his cap. Safe travels, miss. Miss, not prisoner, not enemy. Miss. The train pulls away from Winchester, and Greta watches England disappear through the window, the green fields, the stone walls, the country house that became a prison camp where prisoners were treated like people. She opens the thermos. Steam rises. The tea is dark, properly brewed, still hot enough to matter. She pours a cup and drinks it slowly, thinking about a British corporal who said, "Careful, it's hot," like she was a person who could be burned. About a lieutenant colonel who compared her to his daughter. About Hargreaves who called her a colleague. About Sergeant Whitmore who gave her a thermos for a journey home to a country that might not want her back. Margaret sits beside her. What will you tell people? About this place? The truth. That we expected monsters and found human beings. They won't believe you. I know. They'll say we were brainwashed. That the British used psychological warfare. Maybe they did. Greta holds the warm cup between her palms. Or maybe they just refused to become what we were told they were. Maybe that's the real victory, not defeating your enemy, but refusing to let war turn you into something that requires defeating. The train carries them toward Germany, toward occupation, toward an uncertain future in a country divided among victors. But Greta carries something else now. A thermos, a memory of systematic decency, proof that enemies are only enemies until someone chooses differently. Epilogue, historical record between 1945 and 1948. Over 15,000 German women served as prisoners of war in British custody. They worked in administration, agriculture, manufacturing, and domestic service. They were paid camp scrip for their labor. They were protected under the Geneva Convention and, according to documented records, rarely experienced the brutality common in other theaters of war. This was policy. Deliberate policy. The British War Office, having witnessed the dehumanization that made atrocities possible, chose a different path. They instructed camp commanders to treat prisoners, including those who'd served the Nazi war machine, with basic dignity. Not because those prisoners deserved it, because the British refused to let the war change who they were. Many of these women, upon return to Germany, became advocates for reconciliation. They told their stories. Most weren't believed. Some were called traitors for speaking positively of the enemy. But they continued telling the truth anyway, that in the darkest war in human history, someone chose to be decent. And that choice mattered. 1998, London. A BBC documentary team interviews Greta Fischer, now 75 years old, living in Hamburg with her daughter and 3 grandchildren. The thermos sits on the table between them, dented and old, but still functional. The journalist asks the obvious question. Why did you keep this? Greta runs her fingers over the worn metal. Because it taught me that enemies are only enemies until someone chooses differently. The British chose differently. And it changed everything. Changed what? My understanding of what strength looks like. She picks up the thermos, weighs it in her hands. Real strength isn't cruelty. It's having the power to be cruel and choosing kindness instead. The British had every right to treat us the way we'd been told they would, with vengeance, with brutality, with all the rage we'd earned. Instead, they gave us tea and told us to queue. They paid us for our work. They called us Miss. They treated us like human beings, even when we'd served a regime that forgot what human beings were. She pauses. The thermos catches the light. They never made us forget we'd been wrong. But they never made us forget we were human, either. That's the thing about real strength. It doesn't need cruelty to prove itself. The thermos now sits in the Imperial War Museum, donated after Greta's death in 2003. The placard reads, Thermos given to German POW Greta Fischer by British Sergeant Thomas Whitmore, August 1945. Kept for 58 years as a reminder of humanity during war. Visitors walk past it every day. Most don't notice it. It's just an old thermos in a case full of artifacts. But for those who stop, who read the story, who understand what it represents, it's something else entirely. It's proof that in the worst war humanity ever fought, someone refused to become a monster. And that refusal, that choice, that systematic decency extended to enemies who expected only brutality that changed lives. That broke propaganda's hold. That planted seeds of reconciliation in soil fertilized by hate. The true revolution isn't in victory. It's in what you choose to do with it. The British chose to treat prisoners as the human beings they hoped their own side would become if captured. They chose civilization over barbarism, dignity over vengeance. And somewhere in Winchester, in filing cabinets maintained by later administrators, there's a personnel file labeled Fischer, Greta, Luftnachrichtenhelferin, March 1923. Inside, intake records, work assignments, medical notes, a commendation from Sergeant Major Hargreaves for exceptional organizational skills and dedication to duty. The file doesn't mention the tea, or the thermos, or the moment when a British lieutenant colonel compared her to his daughter and gave her back her humanity without ever acknowledging he held it. But Greta remembered. For 58 years, she remembered. That's what kindness does. It outlasts war. It outlasts hate. It survives in thermoses and memories and stories told to grandchildren who ask, "Oma, what was the war like?" And the grandmother answers, "Terrible." But at the end, someone chose to be kind. And that made all the difference.